A lot of our hormones are secreted based on our circadian rhythm, which you probably have heard of circadian. That's our biological clock, basically. And there are some key hormones, especially things like ghrelin, which we've talked about. Ghrelin is that hunger hormone from the stomach that kind of says, red alert, body's too hungry, slow the metabolism. The ghrelin balancing is influenced by our sleep. Leptin, which is the reassuring hormone from our body fat that says we weigh enough, that's another key hormone affected by our sleep. Cortisol, which is a hormone that responds to stress, is also affected by our sleep.
This is Fat Science, a podcast dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
I'm Dr. Emily Cooper. I've been treating patients with metabolic issues for over 25 years. I'm on a mission to raise awareness about metabolic dysfunction and why diets don't work.
Hi, I'm Andrea Taylor. I've been fat, very fat, chubby, morbidly obese, and done almost every diet ever invented. They all worked until they didn't. I've known Dr. Cooper forever, but when I became her patient and we learned metabolism was the real problem, wow, everything changed, and I've never been healthier.
And I'm Mark Wright. It's time for Fat Science.
Wait, does this podcast make me look fat?
Welcome to Fat Science. I'm Mark Wright, along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. It's great to see you two.
Great to be here.
Hello.
Hi.
On the show today, sleep, your metabolic superpower. You know, you've probably heard lots of studies have been done about the connection between sleep deprivation and all kinds of health problems. A lack of sleep has been linked to more than half a dozen leading causes of death, including cardiovascular disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure. But did you know that not getting enough sleep can also have a profound impact on your metabolic health? Dr. Cooper, I'd love to start with you and just ask the question, how come so many of us shortchange ourselves when it comes to sleep?
It's pretty amazing. When I see patients on a day-to-day basis, we do ask about sleep. We have a questionnaire that everyone fills out. And I'm just shocked half the time with how little sleep people get. And that's with us trying to counsel them as to the importance of sleep, duration, and quality. But a lot of it is that we live in a society where people are focused on productivity at work, I feel like, especially here in the Northwest or in Seattle area. There's a lot of people working hours after hours on the computer, and they literally forget to eat, they forget to sleep. They just are immersed in their work. Some of them are working like 16-hour days. So there's just no time for sleep. And so when they finally get off work, they're trying to relax, they're trying to catch up on their food, and their sleep, patterns really get thrown off and shortened.
What does sleep do for our metabolic health, and why is it so important to get enough of it?
Well, so many things happen while we're asleep that are just critical for our function, not just in the short term present, but also even decades later, because as we age, what we do for our sleep day after day, year after year after year after year, it actually influences the aging process and our risks for diseases, as Mark said, as well as like dementia, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's and other things. And so it's just so important to get the high quality sleep on a day-to-day basis. And during our sleep, a lot of things happen. We go through it's basically a restorative process where our body can rest. We don't have to do anything else. We don't have to be actively, functioning. We're completely at rest. And so all the other internal biological reactions can occur without interruption. And so that's one big thing, is the restorative nature. The other thing is that during the day when we're really active and we're thinking and we're doing things, our brain produces some kind of metabolic byproducts that are not very good to be remaining in our brain. And they're contained in the spinal fluid, the cerebral spinal fluid that bathes our brain. And while we're asleep, the brain goes through a process of cleansing that out and flushing out the bad waste products to allow new cerebral spinal fluid that's free of the waste products back in. So it's kind of like a cleaning mechanism that happens while we're asleep that's really, really important too. And so those two things are really, really critical. And the other is like our hormone balancing. And a lot of our hormones are secreted based on our circadian rhythm, which you probably have heard of circadian. That's our biological clock, basically. And there are some key hormones, especially things like ghrelin, which we've talked about. Ghrelin is that hunger hormone from the stomach that kind of says, red alert, body's too hungry, slow the metabolism. The ghrelin balancing is influenced by our sleep. Leptin, which is the reassuring hormone from our body fat that says we weigh enough, that's another key hormone affected by our sleep. Cortisol, which is a hormone that responds to stress, is also affected by our sleep. And then everybody's probably heard of melatonin, which is a hormone that helps us distinguish between kind of day and night and helps us with our sleep balance. That's affected by our sleep routines, and it's secreted while we're asleep. And then growth hormone, which is a really critical hormone in children. It does help them grow, but in adults, it helps with repair of muscle, tendon, ligament, bone density, things like that. It repairs the body if you're injured or just if you're trying to get stronger, things like that. And so those are some key hormones that are produced while we're asleep too. So without adequate sleep, those can suffer. And then also other things, other chemicals like biochemicals, such as what are called catecholamines, which are one of the fight or flight chemicals in our body. Those can start to get too high as well, and they don't settle down. And insulin levels can get thrown off as well. So there's so much that can happen if we're not getting that adequate sleep. And it's not just humans. It's basically all animals and even plants, apparently.
Wow.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So if we're cutting corners on our sleep, Dr. Cooper, and we've talked about cortisol and ghrelin and some of those leptin, how does that whack out our metabolism in terms of that balance is really key, isn't it?
Yeah. So we talked about, how it can get thrown off. Well, what happens if it gets thrown off? Abnormal weight gain can occur. Slowing of metabolism makes you tired and foggy. Insulin getting disrupted, which could either trigger low blood sugar reactions or predispose to prediabetes or even developing into diabetes. Wounds that aren't healing. Another big function of sleep is actually the immune system, which I didn't mention earlier, but you can have a weakening of your immune system and it can lead to recurrent infections. Mood, of course, is affected. People feel more tired, more anxious, and also cognitively foggy. There's memory issues. There's just so many important things that happen while we're asleep that help keep our brain and our mood and our body just fresh and ready to go the next day. So we feel those deficits when we don't get enough sleep.
So my nephew, I'm doing a shameless plug. So my nephew has a product that he created with some people called Oslo that makes for better sleep. They're a sleep bud that has technology so that you sleep better. And I thought that his target market would be old people. I was like, oh, the old people who can't sleep and everything. He's like, no, it's young guys. Mostly it was his first target market. And I was so shocked. That was the group that they were going after first, that wasn't sleeping the best. I was like, I would think that those people were the most sleepy and would just like instantly be able to sleep better. And it really surprised me. It's just incredible to me how many people in this country or in the world are having a really hard time sleeping. And it's so many more people than I ever thought. And then when I look at all the things that are out there to help people sleep better, like there's all these CBD things, and then there's all these different, like, how is that affecting how we sleep better? Like,
there's so many things,
all the marijuana things, like, what's that about?
Well, first off, you want to find out again, I'm the why person. Why is the person not sleeping? Before throwing more and more things at you, it's like, let's just go through the basics. It's boring, maybe some of the basics, but caffeine consumption, that could actually, late day caffeine consumption could prevent you from sleeping well at night. Exercise that's close to bedtime has been shown to interfere with sleep. Alcohol that's especially close to bedtime interferes with sleep. Marijuana actually can interfere because it's actually a stimulant. So
even if it's in that CBD thing,
well,
like those sleepy time ones?
The THC is more of a stimulant. The CBD hasn't scientifically, there's just varying results with that. But again, looking at the why, though, why would the sleep be disrupted? And so we want to really look at those basics before adding something to try to help sleep. Why maybe are you not sleeping well? It goes back a little bit to that circadian rhythm, too. Circadian rhythm is influenced by a lot of things. Sleep is one of the things. Eating is another. Eating frequency through the day is another thing that helps balance our circadian rhythm. And our environment, like exposure to light at the wrong time of the day, such as taking your electronics to bed at night. And I'm guilty of that too. I'm trying not to, but it's, having that electronic light flashing, bright lights before bed are not good. Your mind that won't turn off, that you're thinking about so many things, you're not relaxed. There's so many things that could contribute to why people are not able to sleep. And so that's kind of what I want to have people focus on first and try to do the measures that are required. Dark room, temperature regulation, all the basics that they call sleep hygiene tips and stuff, including your eating frequency and things like that. But then once you've done that, you can start looking at the quality of your sleep with a little bit more insight.
Yeah.
Wow. I think we're all pretty guilty of checking our phones right before bed, Oh.
Or I know that like if I wake up a little bit, like in the middle of the night, if I wake up and if I check my phone for something, I'm kind of up for a little while. And if I don't check my phone, I can go back to sleep pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Cooper, how much sleep do we need? Or does it depend on the person? Because I've met people who are like, I just need 4 hours a night or 5 hours a night. And I'm one of those people that I need at least 7.5, 8 hours.
Yeah. Well, they have studied this. And if we're talking about adults, the normal amount or the optimal amount is thought to be 7 to 9 hours, or I should say 6 to 9 hours, 6 to 9 hours with maybe
in a row.
Yep, in a row, where maybe 7 to 8 as more the optimal. And that's also what's shown to be 7.5 is kind of what's optimal for ghrelin and leptin and things like that as well. But if you get too little, so less than 6 or more than 9, habitually, neither of those are good. And both of those extremes are associated with increased risk of all-cause kind of mortality, and some of them, like it can be also associated with these degenerative neuro diseases such as Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, stuff like that developing later in life. So it's focusing in on that 6 to 9 hour window where more optimal 7 to 8. And that's really what's the optimal amount of time.
Wow. In a row. That's the hard thing.
Yeah, it is.
I definitely want to ask a question about naps. Good, bad, evil. What are they? And how long is a nap? Is it under 90 minutes, half an hour? What are we talking about when we talk about a nap?
Well, in adults too, it's like if you look at napping, first question, if you have a lot of people that are napping all the time, you really want to find out, well, what's going on at night when you're supposed to be asleep? Do you have maybe sleep apnea that's disrupting your sleep, or a movement disorder disrupting your sleep? Or are you just going to bed too late? Just what can we do to optimize the nighttime sleep? Because if the naps are to compensate for poor nighttime sleep, it gets you into a vicious cycle where you're napping during the day. So now you're not as tired at night. So now you're not doing the nighttime sleeping. And then you have to nap during the day. So it's a repeated vicious cycle. But if you're taking like a half hour nap to just be refreshed in the afternoon, that's totally normal and fine. But it's just looking at where the naps are coming from and why. And one more thing that I didn't mention earlier about how much sleep we need is we have to really keep in mind that adult needs and children's needs are different for sleep. And so children, of course, you could see infants sleep all the time because their bodies are developing so many different functions and there's such a demand for growth and development. And you have to be asleep while you're doing that. Children, there's a lot of that as well, where they're going through developmental stages, that even growth spurts and things like that. So children really do need more sleep also. And so they may need anywhere from 9 to 11 hours of sleep. So that's different than the adult level. So I just wanted to mention that so that we weren't grouping everybody, children as well, into this 7.5 hour window.
I think I remember hearing about a study involving military pilots, Dr. Cooper, where they took short naps, like nothing more than 30 minutes, and it really improved their cognitive function right after the nap. But I think they found that something like more than 45 minutes to an hour, it really has a negative effect because you start to get, is that because you get into a deeper sleep and that's not good in the middle of the day?
I'm not sure, but I think it's because then it can start to impair your nighttime sleep and that circadian rhythm. And so just those quick naps can be really refreshing, but anything longer, I don't think is optimal. Although older adults sometimes do have trouble sleeping during the night. Like the sleep quality is known to kind of decrease as we age. And so it's thought that it is good for older adults that are not getting adequate sleep quality during the night to take like afternoon naps that are longer to help compensate for the total number of hours and to get that 7 hours between the nighttime and the afternoon naps.
How long does it take you to recover from like a sleep deficit? Like, let's say you've had a period of time where you didn't really get the quality sleep. Like, can you make it up? Like, can you do like a long sleep? Like maybe if you traveled to Europe or something and, you had jet lag or something, can you make it up? Can you make up the time?
It's really interesting. They used to always say you can never pay back your sleep debt. And that's what we always heard, that once you've got that sleep deficit, you're never going to pay that one back. You just have to keep trying to do a good job day to day after that. But they did some studies that showed the alteration in these hormones that occur from sleep deficits. If it was within a week, so say you had a week and you had sleep deficit a few days during that week, they did show that if you have 3 consecutive days of sleeping 10 hours after that deficit, it actually restored the balance of those hormones. But again, you don't want to get into that cycle too much because it's not good to sleep that much either. So then you're on both ends of that spectrum that aren't really helpful. So if it's a once in a while thing, you actually can, sleep a lot for a few days and compensate a little bit for the deficits that you've occurred. But, in general, we can't really make up much of it. And it can have an accumulative toll on our body. And so that's why it's good to just make an effort to go to bed early enough, wake up at the same time. It's kind of like be reliably punctual with your bedtime, your waking time. I know it sounds boring, really boring, but how I want everybody to be eating at a certain time, sleeping at a certain time. But that is what really strengthens that biological clock and helps it stay on track.
I think what's interesting, Dr. Cooper, is that the medical community is notorious for depriving young physicians of sleep. Like you hear horror stories from during medical school and their residencies. I heard a doctor being interviewed the other day, and they said, "How long is the longest you've gone without sleep?" And this doctor said he was on duty for 48 hours one time, 2 days with no sleep.
Yeah.
And you'd think that if anyone would understand, especially when the lives of other people are in your hands, why that might not be such a good thing. 2-part question, Dr. Cooper.
Okay.
Why does that attitude exist in the medical community? And I guess, Andrea, what was the second part of the question? Why in the world would you want to see a doctor?
Why in the world would you want that doctor to do surgery on you?
Yeah, after just being a zombie for so many hours. I don't know. What's your perception on that?
Things have really changed. I've been the doctor for 3 decades. So when I was in training, I don't mean to sound like one of those old doctors when I was in training, but when I was in training, there were like no regulations whatsoever on what the residents in training were required to do. So doing 48 hours in a row, that happened regularly. 36 was just commonplace routine.
Oh,
Everyone was having to do that on a weekly basis, and not 36 hours. And then you can go home and take a one night sleep, and then you're back to work the next day. And then in my early days of work, I did do like 48-hour shifts, things like that all the time. And what happened was, as Andrea said, medical mistakes. There were a lot of medical mistakes and errors, and families sued the medical, whatever regulation, medical commission that was like in charge of all of this, and won because of some detrimental things that happened to their family members. And so because of that was traced to this lack of sleep and this terrible rigorous schedule. And so now, and for the last, quite a while, that's not been allowed anymore. So residents and medical people in training do not go through that kind of a schedule anymore, which is a good thing. And there's really only a few specialties now where that may be required within the specialty, where there could be on-call states which may require that, but it'd be very uncommon to see that kind of schedule occurring today. And I think it's a good thing because, as you know, sleep deprivation, your judgment is thrown off, your mood is off, your cognitive ability is definitely off, your reflexes are off. It's just really not a good place to be making life and death decisions.
Was the reason that hospitals were getting this basic free labor and it was just a cost issue?
Nah, I think it's like the rite of passage. In medical school, it used to be the harder you worked, the more you suffered, the more shamed you were or whatever for what you don't know, and the more mistreated you were, the more that just
like
came
a fraternity.
Yeah,
right.
it just
like
came with the territory. Yeah, it was like a rite of it was like it comes with the territory to toughen you up kind of a mentality. I have to say some of it was good. Looking back, I really do believe that being put under that kind of pressure, I get where it's coming from because as a physician, depending on what area you're going to go into, you can be put in a situation where it seems like the impossible, that you have to make decisions that are so difficult and so quickly you have to make them, and you have to show a strength, an inner strength. You also have to deal with, like, if your patients die, it's very emotionally straining. This can be a really rough job. And so I think that some of what they put us through in training, it's also to kind of, I hate to say harden you, but put you in a certain mental, emotional state that does, there is some benefit to it, I have to say. But it was just weird. It's a weird experience, and it's hard to like figure out the pluses and the minuses and whether it's worth it. And, I'm glad that they have switched the way things are done now, but I do question a little bit about what doctors in training are getting now that's preparing them enough for some of the real difficult times that they may experience in certain areas.
Yeah. I mean, we say a lot of things about doctors on, when we're talking, but nobody else's job includes life or death decisions and their hands inside somebody's body. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a pretty tough job.
Yeah, and there's a lot of courage that's involved, especially in certain specialties. And we're glad that people put themselves out for that. But it does, but getting back to our sleep topic, it does not make sense that doctors would be doing that knowing how unhealthy it is. The other thing is doctors also don't stop to eat when they're in training either. So can you imagine the circadian rhythms of physicians in training and how those must be like completely thrown off?
I see these ads all the time, Dr. Cooper, for melatonin supplements. And I think I tried that at one point and it just didn't work. I felt kind of weird. Is melatonin something good to use to regulate that circadian rhythm? And how
Yeah,
does your
yeah.
body, does your body makes that normally, right?
Our body makes it normally. And it is so interesting that they've found that taking a very small amount of melatonin, usually much lower than what people take, is actually able to restore, like you said, the circadian rhythm of the melatonin production if it's taken right at a certain time when you're preparing for bed, and so not too early and not too late, but a certain timing and a certain small dose. One of the issues that we have again is, well, why do you need it in the first place? Is there something that we can do first to restore your own melatonin? The daylight cycle, the eating frequency, the time you're going to bed, the blue lights of electronics, all those things, looking at that. But occasional melatonin is really okay from a metabolic standpoint. But one thing that I notice, and it's in the literature, the scientific literature, that melatonin can suppress part of the metabolic pathway that regulates our body weight and our insulin and blood sugar production. So sometimes when people are dosing the melatonin at higher doses and frequently, it's really not favorable metabolically. And apparently it's also not really good from a sleep perspective to dose it like that.
What about like the tryptophan or whatever it is that's in turkey? Like everyone always says, everybody's eating the turkey at Thanksgiving and then everybody wants to take a nap.
Yeah, it's true. And that does tend to make people sleepy. And we do use some supplements that are in that family as well. And that does not jeopardize the metabolic system at all.
We've talked about sometimes how some people have said, oh, don't eat before bed. That's going to interrupt you falling asleep. But sometimes you're a little hungry before you go to bed, especially if you ate dinner at 6 o'clock or 5:30 or something like that. And now you go to bed at 10 o'clock. It's been a long time since you ate. Maybe you want to have a little snack, maybe at 9 o'clock or something. So maybe the turkey is a good thing to have or something.
Yeah,
What about that?
Well, I'm a believer in, not letting there be more than 3 hours between the last food you eat and going to bed, because otherwise that fasting period, I know a lot of people are trying to get their fasting period to go up. I'm sort of the opposite. I don't want to see people doing a really long fasting period because, again, we're trying to prevent that biologic weight defenses in our patients from activating. And we want to just keep that biological clock going throughout the day. So typically eating something before bed is fine. The only issue is, reflux. A lot of people have that GERD or reflux. And so if there's food in your stomach and you lay down, you can get that reflux occurring. So you'd have to raise the head of your bed. So for people with reflux, it's recommended to allow like 90 minutes or more between the last food you eat and when you go to bed. Otherwise, that reflux will keep you up and disrupt your sleep.
Right. It's a bad thing. But otherwise, I know I feel better and I sleep faster and better if I am not hungry when I go to sleep.
Absolutely. I have patients too that we've solved their sleep problem by doing that, having a PM snack, because they literally were hungry and their body just kept trying to wake them up to try to eat something. And if you really do go to bed hungry, you have to think maybe your ghrelin will end up going higher, your leptin from your body fat will be lower while you're asleep, and that could wake you up where your body's just trying to get a signal, hey, you need to eat something, wake up and go get something to eat. So that could be very disruptive.
Especially in the middle of the night.
Yes.
Right. Especially you might wake up in the middle of the night hungry, and that was why you were waking up in the middle of the night. That's what used to happen.
Yes. I see that in our patients.
Dr. Cooper, let's talk about work schedules. A lot of people don't have autonomy over which hours they work. And I remember when I first came to you, maybe 10 plus years ago, I was doing a morning show on television and I had to get up basically in the middle of the night, something like 2:45 a.m. And you just would shake your head and say, is there any way that you can change that? Or you just, and it was so frustrating because, that just comes with the job, right? Talk to those people who have shift work or work schedules that are just working against their sleep schedule?
It's so tough for people like that. It's a true occupational hazard. I mean, it really should be getting more attention. And I feel like workers should be compensated much more if they're on those kinds of cycles, because studies have shown if you're in that kind of a pattern for even like 5 years, it can shorten your life expectancy, actually. It is detrimental to health. And so a lot of it is because it's so disruptive to the circadian rhythm. And for us metabolically, it disrupts that leptin secretion, which occurs at that later part where you were just starting to wake up. And so if it disrupts that, then you're really only getting the negative signal from the ghrelin, and you're not really getting that reassuring signal coming out. And so things like insulin, prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, all of that can really activate in that situation. So I don't know if they've done studies to show, like, if you follow that with X number of years of not doing that kind of schedule, if you can reverse that. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would think so. I'm sure they haven't studied that, but it is pretty scary when you start looking at the number of people that are in those kind of jobs. Yours was particularly bad because it was like waking you up in the middle of the night. So it wasn't as though you changed your day and night shift totally. It was like you were sort of in between all the time. And then when you weren't working, you were trying to kind of be like a regular person who wasn't on that shift. So your body was having to bounce back and forth, which is really, really hard on the system.
And I realized I had sleep apnea as well. And so, I mean, that was just a wicked storm. When I worked in Salt Lake City on a morning show there, I have vivid memories of putting my car in park at stoplights. I was falling asleep that often.
Oh.
Like I would fall asleep at a red light.
Oh my goodness.
And so I would put it in park just so that I wouldn't start creeping into the intersection.
Wow.
There's a warning sign, huh?
It is.
Whoa. I have one more question. How do you know if you have sleep apnea if you're single?
And there's no one next to you poking their elbow in your ribs, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I think there are some symptoms. So if during the day you have headaches, you're feeling sleepy, foggy, feel like, just not energetic, you wake up feeling like you really didn't get that high quality sleep, that could be an indicator. A lot of people with sleep apnea notice they wake themselves up to a loud gasping or loud snore. And it's like a gasping for air kind of thing. So if you've ever experienced that, that's like a sure sign that you probably do have sleep apnea and should be evaluated. But we have a lot of our patients just get evaluated, just get screened, just because with the, all of the problems that we see in the metabolism, sleep apnea can be an underlying provoking factor. So we just want to make sure that's being corrected.
Yeah. And gosh, it's so easy to test now. It's just a little unit that you wear on your chest, and there's some tubes that go to your nose, and it has a little computer chip that just measures all the data. And I mean, it's not uncommon. I think I was having 2 arousals a minute. Like I was stopping breathing twice every minute on average. And it's so, when you think about it, there's no way to get good sleep if you're stopping breathing that often. I can't remember if that's the exact number, but in severe cases, people are just stopping hundreds of times a night. So
it's so many people have it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this episode is a great reminder, Dr. Cooper, because I mean, we all know this stuff, but it's like common sense in every part of our life. We have to be reminded of it. And then we have to take the advice. We all know what we should do, but I think we completely underestimate the impact that a lack of sleep is going to have on our total health, right? I mean, the more studies that get done on this, it's really serious, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And it's, the amount of sleep we get, the timing of our sleep patterns, when we actually fall asleep, when we wake up, the quality of it, it's all really important.
All right. Andrea, any final thoughts?
I need to be getting more sleep. I got to get some sleep. Oh my God. Good sleep. More in a row. More in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always say, try to fall asleep before midnight because that's when a lot of these hormone changes happen. And scientists recommend falling asleep really between like 9 and 11 at night is considered like the optimal time for the hormone production and the circadian rhythm. And then waking up, the next morning, 6 to 7 or something pretty early.
Mm-hmm.
That's really beneficial, but you have some wiggle room in there. But if you can try to fall asleep before midnight, it's definitely better, and not necessarily too early, because then you're waking up too early when all of the biological hormone cycling has not really finished happening. So you don't want to disrupt that.
Well, this has been great advice, Dr. Cooper. I know that when I get a good night's sleep, I just wake up the next day with a better mental attitude. I feel balanced. My appetite feels balanced. Mm-hmm. It just makes total sense. Great stuff, you two. This has been fun, as usual. Thanks for another edition of Fat Science.
No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.
I'm Mark Wright. Thanks for listening to Fat Science with Dr. Emily Cooper, a Work P2P production. New episodes drop every Monday. If you've enjoyed the conversation, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. This production is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Join us next week for another episode dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.